In a related development, the head of the European Commission has presented plans to raise more than $800 billion over the coming years to increase Europe's defense spending and support for Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen said Europe was ready to take more responsibility for its own security as it faces a clear and present danger. She said Europe was in an era of rearmament, and the key question was whether she was ready to act with the decisiveness and ambition needed. She's proposing loosening EU fiscal rules to allow greater defense spending. Other measures include loans for joint procurement, allowing countries to use EU cohesion funds for arms, and initiatives to raise private capital.
Europe is ready to assume its responsibilities. Rearm Europe could mobilize close to 800 billion euros of defense expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe. We will, of course, continue working closely with our partners in NATO. This is a moment for Europe, and we are ready to step up.
And that's the President of the European Commission there, Ursula von der Leyen. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the International Affairs Analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What do you make of this decision to pause military assistance to Ukraine?
It's not fatal because Ukraine has reserves which were sent before by the states, and so it can, according to expert analyses, survive until summer living off these. So as long as he now reinstates the flow of military aid before Ukraine runs out, bearing in mind the lead time of shipping all the equipment there, then it is not a fatal decision. What it does do is it puts immense pressure on Ukraine, and it shows Trump means what he says, that he is looking for a peace settlement, he wants it now, and he wants, in other words, Ukraine to be compliant to the peace settlement that he has in mind.
Analysts have suggested that what we're seeing here is bold arm twisting, coercive sort of diplomacy. I mean, what do you make of that assessment of what is happening here? The suggestion being that it is just plain wrong.
Well, I think the assessment is correct, but the implication, as you said, is one of disapproval. The reason is, of course, why people disapprove is they have their own visions of the peace settlement, which is basically based on the idea that since Russia was the aggressor, Russia should pay and should cease to occupy Ukrainian territory and never attack again. Donald Trump, for his side, sees all this as being pie in the sky, at best. At worst, he wants to work very closely with Russia. And so, therefore, these criticisms do nothing more than simply reflect what people are thinking. Donald Trump is prepared to do the unthinkable. He is prepared to take action to try and put into place his vision for a peace process for Ukraine and Russia.
And I mean, the US has provided nearly $70 billion of military aid to Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Some would argue that it's much more than that. But it certainly is significantly more than the next biggest donor, Germany, which has given around just $13 billion or so. So this pause will, according to some analysts, significantly tilt the balance in Russia's favor.
If no aid comes from America before Ukraine uses up its American supplies, it will do so without American support, which is not just the quantity, the numbers you've cited, but also the quality, that is to say, the ability, the sheer strength of the American military equipment, it is technologically ahead of anything that Europe has, will shift the war into Russia's favor, enabling Russia to conquer more Ukrainian territory and possibly Ukraine itself. Yes, unless Europe steps in.
Does it seem to you, though, as if pressure and leverage are being unfairly put on Ukraine alone? Or is it fair to say that Russia is already absorbing the full political pain of sanctions?
Well, I must admit that from the first day, I thought sanctions would be next to useless because Russia will carry on fighting even with the sanctions and find ways round. And this is indeed what has happened. The sanctions are, in that sense, not exactly irrelevant, but certainly ineffectual in stopping Russia, best slowing her down. So that's not a key point. The key point is here: can a nation which does not want to fight this war force another nation not to? And that's what we're coming down to. And as for it being unfair, well, we've got 6,000 years of history. It's not the first time it's happened. It doubtless won't be the last. Please note, in World War II, Great Britain and America forced Poland to accept being liberated by the Russians. So there's nothing new about all this. It's just that when USA does it, and Donald Trump in particular, who's a hate figure, then automatically everything what he says is wrong, and therefore the criticism tends to be very virulent against him. What Donald Trump wants to do, and he is succeeding in this, is stop sending money to Ukraine and let Europe take up the slack. Europe spends blood, if there must be, in Ukraine. Here's America. America first will go its own way and just carry on making money.
You're watching The World with me, Charles Enyugolu. Apologies for that rather rude cut-off there. We're going to return to the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, who is in London. Dr. Laskiewicz, I do apologize. There was some technical issues here that sort of forced you off the air. But I think before you left, we were talking about President Zelensky being urged to go to Washington to sign this minerals deal, say sorry and thank you, and do that for the sake of the future of Ukraine. And I was wondering briefly whether you think that might work.
If he succeeds in doing so, yes, it would be a very positive step forward. It would bring America back in to some degree. It would show willing on his side. However, there are two problems. Number one, is it enough? You see, one of the problems is that President Trump is now seeing dollar signs in Russia and working with Russia. And please note, he's taken all sorts of things. He's taken Russia off the list of cyber enemies, for example. He's already talking about working with Russia in terms of business. And therefore, he can get all the raw materials he needs from, and I point this out, from Russia. Number two, and this is the key problem, if Zelensky does this, it is by no means clear that President Donald Trump will change his mind about his peace plan, which he has not, of course, announced, and rather see this as a sign of weakness, and therefore they can force through his plan. Therefore, although it is a good move for President Zelensky to do so, it is not only humiliating for him personally and for Ukraine, but it is to some degree not fully effectual and maybe totally ineffectual if President Trump goes even more towards Russia.
And of course, in that context, the pressure now firmly on Europe to bolster Ukraine's defense. And in the last few hours, the president of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has announced plans to relax fiscal plans to allow greater defense spending and raise more than $800 billion in the coming years towards defense. Does it seem as if Europe is beginning to act with decisiveness that's needed and is taking more responsibility for its own security?
Yes, overall, yes. But there are many, many problems. The first one is 800 billion over a certain number of years is actually less than America is spending. Secondly, it's simply starting, so to speak, in certain areas from zero. America is so far ahead. It's the quality of the arms I'm referring to, and catching it up is not a wave of a few dollar signs. It takes a long time to pick up and collect up. China, for example, and this is one of the well-known jokes, couldn't make a ballpoint pens. Why? Because the actual precision engineering takes time, and China is now a leading economic power. But Europe's got exactly the same problems. Just to catch up on everything that America has done, it's going to take years, and we don't have years. This war, and especially Trump's decision about what he thinks as the correct peace settlement, is happening now. Therefore, all this talk, whilst it is, of course, very welcome news for America, because Donald Trump wants Europe to spend money instead of America having to spend it, actually is ineffectual in the context of the war occurring right now and is of very little use. Therefore, it won't change matters fundamentally.
Nevertheless, all this, of course, paints a terrible picture about the state of Western diplomacy. I mean, somebody said that what's going on now is the worst crisis in transatlantic relations since the alliance between the US and Europe was created during and after the Second World War. Is it that serious?
Yes, I would say it is. It must be remembered that there have been crises, transatlantic crises before, such as over the Suez Canal, when Great Britain and France went in to denationalize it and America objected. What happened then was Great Britain backed down, and then from that point onwards was never again seen as a great power, incidentally. And right now we're having a crisis on even a greater scale, because what he has shown up is the sheer defenselessness of Europe without America. And it is a huge crisis. And no one has a clue how to bring Donald Trump back on track as being a full member of NATO and supporting Europe. As things stand, NATO is dead and Europe has to fend for itself, which is neither prepared to do nor can do in the short term.
So finally, and we appreciate the time you've taken to talk to us. I mean, basically, while Mr. Trump is in the White House, America First is emerging as an idea that essentially treats the rest of the world as raw material for American supremacy. And included in this are America's allies, all of them fodder for Mr. Trump.
Well, I think a very harsh analysis, but by no means totally off key. Certainly, America First means he put his own interests first instead of the interest of the West or the world, which are more nebulous concepts in any case. But please remember, he is the president of America. His electorate is American. At the end of 4 years, if he chooses to go for a third term, it's not going to be Great Britain or Ukraine or Russia that puts him into power. It'll be the American electorate. So therefore, in that point of view, what Donald Trump is doing is unpleasant for the rest of the world. But in a sense, it's no different to Russia putting its own interests first, or China, or for that matter, certain nations in Europe historically, and arguably up till now, you could make out a case for everyone has their own, so to speak, axe to grind and their own interests to defend. But he's not done it in a more brutal manner, cutting across decades of American policy. But one thing is quite clear. Please note, as a result of this, the West is in disarray, but America itself is strong and, as you point out, can use the rest of the world as raw materials, if you like. Yes.
On that rather depressing note, I want to thank you very much indeed, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, and I apologize once again for taking you unceremoniously off the air, but I'm glad we got you back. The international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, talking to me on the line there from London.